What up, world, and welcome to another episode of the South African Spies podcast. Today is another segment of the Bramdo Bite series, and today's topic is daddy issues. Now, what do I mean by daddy issues? I mean the relationship that we had with our fathers and the experiences that entailed. So obviously joining me to have this conversation is Mickey. Hi, Mickey.
Hello.
So Mickey, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about your relationship with your father?
Okay, so my relationship with my father is a long, drawn-out one to get to today. Obviously, it's 30 years of relationship to get through.
30 plus?
No, 30 years. It ended there.
Oh, okay.
But maybe we'll just start from the beginning and we'll see how it goes from there. So my earliest memories from my father was actually that he wasn't there.
Okay.
So my earliest memory of anything to do with my father was me counting the days for him to come home, because there was a set date that my mother would tell me, oh, your father's going to be back on this day. Like, I would speak to him on the phone and stuff, but it was like once a week or whatever, and then it would be counting the days. I remember a calendar in my room that I had marked, okay, he's going to be back on this day. Then that day came when he was back, and that was like my first memory of my father.
How old were you at this time?
I think I was like 3.
Okay, and you remember that?
Kind of.
It was like one of those like blurred memories.
It's a blurred memory. I can picture the calendar in my head. That's what triggers the memory. Is like I can picture it was a yellow calendar with like pop out numbers that you can punch in as the days go. So after that, I don't really remember much of him being around. Shortly after my sister was born, my parents separated. So then it kind of just became the norm that he wasn't around, and I never really thought about it much because my grandfather was fulfilling the role of like father figure in the house, and I think he did that for me and my sisters equally, so no one missed the presence of my father. Thereafter, I think it was only like well into primary school when I have memories of him again. I remember we went to Disney World together, my grandfather, my father, myself, my cousins, and I recall he was there on that trip, but interacting with him wasn't much of a memory.
But for that trip, you were also quite young.
I was about 7, I think, but obviously at that age, you don't want to hang out with the grown-ups. You want to hang out with your cousins who are the same age, especially in Disney World.
Yeah, especially, I was just going to say, of course, especially at Disney World.
Yeah. So I remember he was on the trip and I was on his passport. So like when we went through passport controls and stuff, he was there. But other than that, I don't remember much of interactions with him on that trip.
Okay, and that's like basically kind of how your memories went as a child? As
a child, yeah. So there was just like on and off memories of him here and there. Probably if I really look at pictures and think about it, I can remember more. But offhand, like nothing springs forward as my memory of my father as a young child.
And is this something that continued into like your later days, like being a teenager and young adult?
So when I started high school, my father was actually the one who took me for my first day in high school. Might have been my father, it might have been his now ex-wife.
Okay.
So after my mother, my father got married again.
Mm-hmm.
And he's since then divorced again and now remarried another time. So my first stepmother, it was either her or my father took me for my first day. This came about because my grandfather passed away when I was just finishing primary school. You know, that's when my father became more prominent feature in my life again. But it's also because of my first stepmother, where she had a really good relationship with myself and my sisters. So it opened us up to like having a more of a relationship with him. We'd spend more weekends with him. And I remember every second weekend I would stay at his house. His wife would come pick us up and we'd go there, spend the weekend, play games, and come back.
So she was very encouraging then of him having a relationship with you guys.
Yes. And also her having the relationship with us on her own as well.
Equally important.
Equally, yeah. So, but she wanted us to spend time with him. She made sure she would book adventure golf or whatever it was to force him to spend time with us.
Sure. force him to spend time with you?
My father was always the type that would be like, if there's work to be done, he would do work rather than spend time with anyone. And also his idea of spending time with someone is sitting in the same room and doing your own things.
Just being in each other's presence.
Yeah, not really spending time, like not doing anything, but the fact that you're in his house means he's spending time with you.
Okay, interesting. And I suppose as kids, that's not really how you see it.
No, you want to do things, even if it's not like go out to fancy places and you want to play in the garden. He's lived in a complex. They had a nice braai area and pool, so we always wanted to be there, come at least watch us swim.
Or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was teenagers.
This was pretty much teenage years up until about 15 or 16. And I think that's when he separated from that wife. And then he disappeared again for a while when he was sorting his stuff out and getting a new place to stay and that kind of stuff. And then when he again met his now current wife, that's when we kind of started having a relationship again together. But it was just with me, not my sisters.
Is there a particular reason for that?
You'd have to ask my sisters.
Oh, was it on their part that they didn't want to... Like, who initiated the relationship with him?
I think it was just very difficult given the relationship we had with his now wife. It made them a bit uncomfortable being there, so they didn't want to do it. Plus, when he now moved in with his now current wife, he also moved in with her parents, mother and father, her sister, and her 3 brothers. Were all living in that house. It's obviously uncomfortable for...
Yeah, especially because your sisters are younger than you. So yeah, I would imagine that would be something quite
and
difficult.
Like we mentioned in the puberty talk, it's like an awkward stage. And now you want a girl at that stage of her life to go in with these strangers and live in their house. I was also sleeping on the couch. So it's not like there was space enough for all of us to go. So every second weekend I would go stay there. But it was almost like something I had to do rather than what I wanted to do. So I would take my PlayStation with and then basically wait for everyone to go to sleep so I can play PlayStation the whole night.
Okay, so that's what you look forward to. But then what about what you did over the weekend with him? Did you get to a point where you actually spent more time and did more things together?
No. Like the weekends, he would do his weekly shopping and, his normal stuff that he had to do for that house. Sometimes I would go for the shopping, like if it was to United Butchery, because then I could get aqua wires or whatever it is. I would choose if I want to go or not go, but it wasn't really like time spent together. It was more time spent with one of his brother-in-laws who would also play PlayStation and stuff.
So that's who you spent more time with on those weekends?
Yeah, that's more the relationship that I had.
So you got along with kind of that brother-in-law of his?
The one brother-in-law I got along with quite well.
And the rest of the family?
I wouldn't say I didn't get along with them. I got along with most of the rest of the family. It was just, you go to visit your father, you're not looking to make friends, you're looking to spend time with your father.
Yeah.
So that carried on pretty much through till the end of high school. And then when I started university, it was pretty much the same. And then around about my second attempt at varsity, when I was doing my first year, that's when my father bought the soccer arena in Randburg, the indoor soccer arena. And because of that, my current group of friends and I decided to put a team in and we started playing football. And that's when the relationship with my father kind of grew more, because it was outside of his house, where in the soccer arena we could bond more on something that related to him. So I was never a sporty person. I did the soccer to, lose some weight and keep up with my friends. And it was a nice way for us to spend a Friday evening. That's where the relationships really started with my father to be a good one, where we would get along, bond about soccer. And I would go there straight after varsity and spend basically the whole Friday night there.
And then you'd be there like on weekends when there were tournaments and stuff.
That came a bit later, but as we got better at soccer, so 2 or 3 years later, we had multiple teams in multiple different leagues. So it was like Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday or Sunday would be our practices with him and his friends. So it was spending a lot of time there. All the tournaments that was hosted in Randburg Arena, we would play in. either as my own team or I would play as one of his teams. And also on a Saturday or Sunday, I can't remember properly, but they would have a charity that they ran every morning for underprivileged kids. And I happily volunteered there. So I would spend those mornings with him, helping the kids, making food for them and doing whatever needs to be done.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
You got to spend that time.
Yeah, I got to spend that time. And then we had a pretty good relationship for that period. And that brings us to my sister's wedding.
Is that the point where that relationship kind of ended?
That's where the relationship definitely ended for me.
Oh, definitely. Okay.
Definitely ended for me. At my sister's wedding, him and his wife caused a bit of a fuss over the food and whatever other reasons they could give for getting angry. And they literally walked out of the wedding reception as it was beginning. I think it was just after starters that they walked out. And they also did it in a very mean way where they went and we were in the middle of like somewhere, I can't remember, but it was far out to get. My sister had paid for everyone to stay over. Obviously, that means the bar is limited. When you run out, you run out. So they proceeded to go and buy alcohol from the bar off the tab, not using the wedding tab, thinking that it's okay to just buy all the alcohol and leave so they could go to their hotel room and, have drinks and whatever.
Have their own party on your daughter's wedding day.
Yes, because they felt they were not respected and whatever it is. That's when it kind of fell apart for me because I love my sisters. I will always stick up for them. So I went after him to kind of like, what are you doing? And we had a fight and he left. And the next day he proceeded to send a couple nasty messages to my mother and saying that he's going to disinherit my sisters and he wants nothing to do with them. And my youngest sister was on his medical aid and she was quite, she has an autoimmune disorder. And he's like, I'm taking her off the medical aid immediately. You guys must just deal with it on your own. And I was like, that's a bit nasty to do, knowing that she's, like, if there's a gap in her medical aid, she's going to struggle for the rest of her life. And then he wanted my younger sister's car back. He had also paid for my car, but his wife didn't know.
Oh.
So when the day came to return that car, because I was like, fine, I'll bring it to you tomorrow. We dropped off both cars and I told him you can have my car back too because you can't have me without my sisters.
Yeah, it's a package deal.
It's a package deal. Sorry for you. And then we had another big fight and he said, well, if I die tomorrow because of this, because you're going to give me a heart attack or whatever his bullshit story was, then I mustn't come and do his last rites for him and blah, 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 blah. So I was like, whatever. But he refused to take the car keys from me. As we were driving away, we stopped. I put my car keys in the mailbox. I left the car in his driveway and we drove away. That was basically almost the last time I spoke to him. So after that, the next week, I think it was, or maybe it was even the next day, he had got one of his soccer boys to drive the car and leave it outside my mother's house, saying he doesn't want it back. And he also did the same with my sister's car. I never responded. I never even used the car for a while because I was like, I don't want it. And then eventually it was just sitting there. So I was like, I'm going to just use it. Then was Corona time. And I don't know what triggered him, but he asked for the car back. He was sending quite horrible, nasty messages to my mother because he couldn't get hold of me.
Yeah, I was around at this time, so yeah, I also know like he was sending very nasty messages to mommy at something stupid also. It was something really, really stupid.
Yeah, he said something about I'm tired of everyone using me,
yeah.
blah, 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 blah. Then I had to respond to him and say, your car's sitting outside, the keys are in it, you better get someone to fetch it before it gets stolen. Please don't contact me or my mother again.
Yeah, because he wasn't actually contacting you, he was contacting your mother.
Yeah.
Because he was also being very nasty and it was actually at a time where your grandmother had just passed away.
Yes. So my mother just lost her mother due to COVID. And it was quite traumatic because she couldn't say bye. And like everyone who lost their people during COVID was not the easiest thing to do. And now all of a sudden she's getting these messages which infuriated me.
Understandably so.
Yeah, so ever since then, haven't spoken to him, haven't...
So that was the last time.
Yeah, I don't really count that as the last time because I just sent the message. It's not like we actually had a conversation or anything.
Fair.
And the last time I did see him was the day after my sister's wedding.
That was many years ago.
That was many years ago. Yeah, so that's basically a quick summary of the relationship with my father. Oh,
Not quick.
not quick summary of the relationship with my father, but a summary of 30 years or so. Now, you tell us about your story.
My fun story.
Your fun story.
I have a fun story too. So look at us. Two people with daddy issues have found each other, eh?
Daddy issues.
Daddy issues. I love saying daddy issues because people just automatically think we have daddy issues based on our stories.
Yeah, just mine went to get the milk multiple times.
Oh boy. Okay, so my story is, from what I was told, when my mother was pregnant with me, my father actually was with someone else. You know, obviously when she found out, that was kind of the end of it. I don't know if he was even there for my birth or if he was there, but he was like heavily intoxicated or whatever it is. Those are not like really stories I want to hear or I ask about and stuff. Sometimes I'll hear when they, you know, when the old people talk or when my aunties and uncles talk and stuff, then I'll hear. But from the little that I've overheard, it was kind of something around there. And I know that he was around for my first birthday. And I only know that because there's a picture. Other than that, I have absolutely no thought, memory, linking, or anything of the sort for my father until I was maybe about 16 years old. So from childhood, obviously, till 16, I grew up with no father in my life, which was fine.
You didn't ask for a father, like, didn't ask about him or anything?
No, I wasn't interested at all. It was not... I've thought about this so many times at so many different phases of my life, in so many different moods. There's not a single time that I ever can look back and say I ever had this yearning or need to know or to ask or to want to find out or anything of the sort.
Yeah.
That changed when I was 16 though, because my godmother who lives in Durban ran into him in like Chatted Center or somewhere there, and he recognized her and spoke to her and asked about me. And it was a very random thing because it's not like we have anybody else really in common. I think he is in contact with one of my cousins, like my elder cousins or something of the sort. But other than that, we haven't really had any mutual people. Yeah, so it was pretty weird when he asked my godmother how I am and where I am and what I'm doing. And my godmother just responded, she's basically living her best life. Whatever the equivalent was back then.
Yeah, she's great.
Great.
You don't need to ask. She's perfect.
She's, doing well for herself. She's good. And she then saw that, he has 2 girls. So when she spoke to my mother, she obviously told my mother this, and my mother did tell me. And that's kind of where it changed for me because I realized he's got 2 daughters, which means I'm a big sister. And I thought that as a big sister, I now have a responsibility to be a good big sister and a present big sister because that's the role that my sister played in my life.
Yeah, so because she was your role model, you're like, this is my chance.
Not, it wasn't even from a role model sense. It was the fact that my sister had such a big influence in my life and she's such a big part of it.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I have 2 sisters. I am the big sister now, so it's my turn to actually be there for 2 other girls. I think that was something that my sister and my mother kind of realized, and like one of my uncles, and they asked me if I wanted to go and meet my father. And I said, you know what? Not yet. Like, I'm not ready to, and it's not because I was holding anything in and stuff. There was just no need. I was focusing on other things at that point.
But I think it's also like, for you don't want to just go because someone suggested it. You wanted to be on your term.
Exactly. That was probably subconsciously what it was.
Yeah.
It needed to be when I said so and when I wanted it. I always said to myself, when I turn 18, I'll do it because I felt, you're always told when you're 18, you're an adult and that kind of thing. So I kind of stuck to that. And then after my 18th birthday, I think it was April, Easter weekend or something, we were in Durban. I was with my mother and my sister. And the one morning we just woke up and we were going to Chatswood to see somebody else. And then I said to them, well, okay, let's go meet him. It was such a spur of the moment thing.
And they knew where he stayed and stuff. They didn't have to find out.
We assumed. So everybody assumed that he still stayed in the same house because he was still in the same area. That's where, my godmother had seen him and stuff.
Okay. So they just assumed.
Yeah. It was all based on assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nobody had phone numbers or did a check-in or anything of that sort. we kind of just rocked up at the house. And the reason that everybody knew the house was because in the previous episode, talking about my granny's past and stuff, we talk about her house in Chatsworth.
Yeah, that everyone was there
all
around
the
that.
time.
Yeah.
He literally lived down the road.
Okay.
So they were kind of like on top of the hill and he was a bit further down. And yeah, so we kind of just like went there and we rocked up one day. I wasn't really nervous. I was more curious to kind of see the girls. I was excited to meet the girls because it was 2 daughters, it was 2 sisters, and I was really, really excited for that. But I didn't really have any feelings towards what it was going to be like meeting him. But meeting him was definitely a brain-altering moment for me, and that really put a lot of perspective into everything else. And that was simply because we got there. His mom, so my grandmother on that side, was, sitting outside rather, and just enjoying the weather. His daughters and his wife were inside, and he wasn't at home. And, we got there, we walked up the stairs. His mother had recognized my mom and my sister, but didn't recognize me because they've never seen me before. Eventually, when we got there, we sat outside. They brought chairs outside for us, and we all kind of just sat there. They've called him, and they waited, for him to come back. And he got back. He eventually came up the stairs, and, he looked at my mother, and he greeted her, and he remembered her. He looked at my sister, greeted her, remembered her. And he looked at me. He knew who I was, but he also didn't know who I was.
He was trying to make sure that it was you.
Yeah, like he needed that kind of confirmation. And then he called the girls outside and his wife and stuff. And the moment that changed everything, or that moment I speak of, is when he introduced the big daughter as his eldest to me.
Okay.
Who is actually his eldest. But for me, that was something that really came from his subconscious. It kind of showed me that consciously and subconsciously, that's his eldest. So he hasn't given me that kind of second thought or thought of me in all this time for 18 years as the child who's not in my life. That was the subliminal messaging for me. So anyway, met the girls and they were really excited, spoke to them. His wife called me inside and, she basically was like, oh, we're so excited to meet you and, to finally have you be a part of our lives and stuff. But I really wish you did call and to let us know that you were coming so we could prepare the girls and, just be ready for you to come. And I said, well, unfortunately, me coming here has got nothing to do with you and how ready you were. This was all about me and when I felt the timing was right.
Yeah, they should have been preparing them their whole life almost to say, you actually have an older sister. She lives in Joburg. She's not with us in this family. She stays with her own mother, whatever the story is.
Yeah, exactly.
So that when that day comes, they're not taken by surprise.
Exactly. And that was something I also said to her. I said, if you didn't prepare your own children for this, unfortunately, that's on you. That's your parenting. That's got nothing to do with me. It's not my responsibility to take that on. And I see, from the other side, and I feel for the girls being put in that situation of big shock and surprise. But at the same time, that's on their parents.
Yeah, I think it was more for their parents' sake because I'm just thinking as younger girls, they probably didn't care too much about the drama. They're just like, oh, cool, a big sister.
Yeah, that's exactly what their take was on it. And yeah, it was really great getting to know them. And that was when I first met my father.
At 18.
At 18.
Yeah. And after that?
After that, they constantly invited me, to come and stay and to come and spend time. And I did because the girls were really excited about having me around. So I did go for a couple of weekends and long weekends and holidays and stuff like that. Not long periods of time, but I would visit. I also needed to be comfortable. And to me, these were unfortunately still strangers. That was part of it. The other part of the relationship was I was obviously in Joburg, they were in Durban, so it was constant phoning and, it was on the house phone. So you'd phone the house phone to speak to everybody and that's what I did. And it was something I did religiously was to phone every weekend to make sure I spoke to the girls. But I also realized that if I wanted to have a relationship with the girls, there was no way I couldn't have a relationship with him and his wife. So I did it. It was the respectful and the right thing to do. But I also had to consider what relationship I wanted more. And because the relationship with the girls was so important to me, I was willing to just have some sort of relationship with their parents. And what really got to me, I think, in that time was the more I spent time, the more he tried to explain and make excuses and kind of try and blame things on like my uncles and my family and, they kept him away and stuff like that, which was okay if you felt that, you needed to explain yourself, but I was never looking for an explanation. And he was very also apologetic about, I'm sorry, not I couldn't be there, but I'm sorry that I don't have the money to give to you now. And it's like, I don't need your money. It's not something I came here for at all.
But then did that lead to a lot of fighting between you two when he was trying to explain? Did you like, I don't want to hear it? And
so I wouldn't say fighting. I just think I was very direct. And I think that's something his wife picked up on in the first conversation, because she said to me in that very first day that we met, also part of that conversation was, I don't want any issues with your mother. And I was like, well, as long as you don't have issues with me, you don't have to worry about issues with my mother.
Yeah.
Because that's the only reason she would have any issues. I was just very direct with everything. So when those kind of conversations would come up and he would have it, I would kind of try and stop it and be like, I don't want to talk about this. Not now, not ever. And I remember one day I was really like irritated by the amount of conversation, the amount of blame being put on the family that I knew, because that is my only family, is the family that I knew and I was raised by. So I was very annoyed, and I had, I stopped him and I said to him, look, there's something you need to understand. And that is, if I could go back and change anything and have you as my father in my life, I wouldn't do it. I would not change a single thing about what my life was like till today. Because if you were in my life, I wouldn't have been the person that I am today. And I value the person that I am today and the strength that I carry way more than what could have been.
Yeah, I can see, because my father also did a similar thing. I don't think he tried to explain it as much, but there was a few points where he put the blame on my granny or whoever didn't want him around the house, or he would say, they did a prayer to keep him away, or whatever stupid reason he could come up with. And at that time, like, we were kind of getting to a good relationship on and off. So I just dismissed it. I didn't argue, but he would also put those excuses in. I think it's more to validate himself for not being there then.
Yeah. I think it came from a place of guilt.
I think so.
I really do.
Hearing you say that you didn't want your father as part of your life, like, makes me think, would I have wanted him to be more consistent in my life? And I don't think I would. Like, my father, the relationship ended bluntly because of his now current wife. But before that, he and I were in a really good space. And when they temporarily broke up, he was like the best person to be around. Like, he was kind and generous. But one thing always stuck was that I was never the son my father wanted, because he was very athletic. And I'm not naturally athletic. Yes, I got to a point where I was decent at cricket, and I got to a point where I was actually good at football, but I worked on it. I wasn't naturally talented. And he wanted a son that would, get all the awards and that kind of stuff. And even when I was playing in tournaments and my teams were winning, I would never want to be I wasn't the Cristiano Ronaldo. I was the guy in the back playing the team game. So because of that, I don't think I'd want him in my life, because he would always have put that pressure on me.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that just came up now when you were talking about that. And it's like, would I have wanted my father in my life? I don't think so. I'm happy with the way things went.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I just don't think I would have had the amount of appreciation that I do now for the people who were there.
Yeah.
If he was.
Yeah.
Or possibly I would have seen a very different side to my mother. And, I don't know what witnessing some of the things that I would have witnessed would have done to my character. So I think that's more the reason that I would rather not. So that was like back then, and we continued having this, kind of relationship, and I would continue being there for the girls as much as I could. Actually got to a point where when I matriculated, I wanted to work really hard, because my plan was to get myself as independent as quickly as possible, so that by the time, my younger sister, the eldest of the two, was ready to finish school and study, to offer her the opportunity to come up to Joburg, come and study here, live with me, I'll take care of you, but just get yourself a good degree, get out of the negative space where you have all these other influences. And I felt that that was very much my responsibility. And I felt that because my sister would have done the same thing for me. My sister has done those kind of things for me to make sure that I am getting the most out of every opportunity, every situation, every part of life. So I really felt that's what I needed to do. And, everything happens for a reason. So I was really sick I think it was 2012. I fell very ill, ended up in hospital, and the doctors couldn't really find what was wrong with me. So after I left the hospital, I was still getting sick every week, and I was in a lot of pain and staying at home, and the doctors really didn't know where to look. So my mother had said to me, please, can you make sure you phone your father and just find out what's the medical history like so that we can tell doctors where they need to maybe look. I said, okay, cool, I'll do it. And then, the one day they knew I was at work and they tried phoning consistently, and I really thought something was wrong, but I worked at a call center at that time, so I couldn't really answer my phone immediately. And I'd message them like, what's going on? And they're like, no, please just call back urgently. So I said, okay, as soon as I can, I will. And as soon as I finished work, my mother phoned me and was like, listen, you need to phone your father. Like, they called on the house phone for you. It must be something urgent. Just call back. So I did. And at that point, my phone wasn't saving numbers. So I was remembering like the last few digits of every number. And I called back and his wife answered. And I said, listen, you guys called. Like, what's wrong? Like, no, Dad called you. You wanted lotto numbers. It's like, what? Lotto numbers? That's
urgent.
That's urgent. That you can't do that. You can't make me panic and stuff like that. I appreciate you want my input, but time and place.
Yeah.
Also, I finished work at 3:00. You could wait. So I was very irritated, and then I said, okay, you know what? Just send me his number and I'll call him back. And she sent me the number, and I didn't end up calling back because I was actually busy, and I was quite annoyed with that. So I left it, and then the next week I obviously got sick again. My mom said, please just phone. Got onto the house phone, spoke to him, and he gave me very abrupt answers. He was very abrupt with me and short. So it was like, I was like, hey, how are you? How's things going? And he was like, fine. Not even asking how I am or anything. So I was like, okay, then I'm not here to.
If you don't want to converse, then
yeah,
I'm going to hang up and go.
Exactly. I don't need to have this chit chat. So I was like, cool. Listen, I'm just phoning to find out. Can you tell me what the medical history is on your side? The doctors kind of need to know where to start looking. And he's like, yeah, okay. And then he told me like a little bit and stuff. And I was like, cool, thanks. And then he's like, yeah, I tried phoning you last week. And I was like, yeah, I know, for lotto numbers. And he says, yeah. And then he says, as your father, it is my right to have my number saved on your phone and for you to call me Dad. That was like, buddy, bro. I wasn't nasty. I wasn't giving attitude, but it was just really in a very simple tone. And I said, unfortunately, in our situation, your rights are not just given to you, they have to be earned. So you can't say that you have that right. I never felt comfortable with calling him Dad because there was so much meaning to that word. And I've never called anyone Dad in that context. So for me, it just felt very wrong and it felt very fake. So I never referred to those kind of names. I actually just didn't call anybody anything. And he couldn't understand that, and that's something that really ticked him off. But I feel very validated in the fact that relationships are different, and those were things that needed to be earned from him, and it wasn't given to him on a silver platter. And that was kind of how our fight started. And I said, unfortunately, that's what the situation is. If you don't like it, there's really nothing I can do about it. And he just said, okay. And he put his wife on the phone. And then all of a sudden she came on and she just went at me. She's like, yeah, just remember that you in our lives because you wanted to be here. You walked in. We didn't ask you to be a part of it and stuff. So as she's saying all of this, I was repeating it and my sister heard. And being the protective sister that she is, she just turned and she says, what's going on? And she was listening to this whole thing. She got up, she came, she took the phone from me, and she listened to the rest of it. And my sister just went off and said, how dare you? Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to my sister that way? Firstly, she's sick. How dare you put more stress on her? And secondly, how dare you not appreciate the effort she's giving for your children? And yeah, that was kind of the end of it. And my sister said, well, you know what? You've now lost that privilege, so you will have nothing to do with her, and she will not be phoning you again. That was it.
That was it until When we got engaged.
Well, a little bit before that, actually. That was it until a couple of years later. So this was past my 21st birthday when nobody had called. And I realized that we needed kind of that break because shortly after the fight was my sister's birthday. So I called her cell phone to wish her. And because I called from private number, because I was worried her parents were going to see it and not like give her the phone or allow her to answer, I called from private number. She answered. I wished her. She didn't know it was me. And she was fine. Super appreciative and excited about getting a birthday wish and whatever, like how you would get for a normal call. And then at the end of it, she was like, sorry, who's speaking? And I said, it's Akka. And like you could just kind of feel, you know, when you feel on the phone somebody's demeanor change?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. And then that's kind of when I realized, okay, so obviously the girls are being spoken to about what's happening.
From their side of the story.
From their perspective. So I don't want to get involved in that. I'm not here to tell the girls anything. In my eyes, they're still kids. They really don't need to be involved in this. It's not for them to deal with, so let it be. And that was it. And then a couple of years later, their mother messaged me on Facebook after writing a whole lot of stuff on like my Facebook wall and like very mean things that I had to go and like delete and stuff. But she messaged me and she was like, yeah, you know, the girls miss you and we really should, you know, not get the kids involved in these things and stuff. And I was like, that's exactly what I was trying to do, which is why I was still trying to speak to them and, you know, have that relationship with them. It was just us that had an issue, and I agree with you. But I also thought to myself, that's great that you've now come to this realization, but you're also forgetting that I'm also a kid. You are the adult to me too. Yeah. You're just not acting like it.
Yeah.
That was also like another, you know, brain altering moment. And then from there, I think we kind of got back into calling every now and then and stuff. But the relationship with the girls had changed quite a bit, and that kind of never recovered. So everything I had planned and the kind of closeness that we had initially started building was all very much diminished. And that was really just it. That was it. There was nothing really more to that. My grandmother from that side had passed away. So they told me, and, you know, out of respect, I did go for the funeral because my mother taught me better. They wanted me to, you know, say something. And I said, I don't want to say anything because it feels so fake. I didn't know her. She wasn't my grandparent. I have one granny. You know?
It's going to be a generic something you read out of a book because you don't know someone.
Exactly. That's what it would be. And then they asked me to read the eulogy. Eventually, I agreed to reading the eulogy, but it took a lot for me to get to that point, even because I didn't feel I had a right to. She had plenty of other grandchildren, but also I didn't have that relationship, and it was really, I feel it was very disrespectful.
They might as well have got the pastor or whoever to...
I think maybe even the pastor would have been closer to them.
Yeah.
To do that. But I did it because I was trying to avoid drama in this like mourning period, and that was it. I haven't like done anything. And then, yeah, like you said, until we got engaged. But actually, it wasn't even when we got engaged.
It was just before.
No, it was when we decided to get married, when we set our date.
Oh, yes.
So when we set our wedding dates...
By the way, your listeners don't know that we set our date before we got engaged.
Yeah, that is very true.
That's a different story, a different podcast coming soon. But yes, when we set the date, that's when you told your father.
Yeah, so when we had decided on like both our wedding dates, because we also had the two weddings, because of their situation and their circumstances, we like decided we'll tell them early so that it gives them more than enough time to plan and save and kind of decide if they want to be there. And also inviting them was out of respect, and we did that. So we invited them, and it was over a year. It was like a year and 4 months, a year and 6 months even before the actual wedding date. And we told them about it, and then, you know, they were super excited-ish.
For the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reasons too. They were kind of like excited, and it ended up being that nobody came for the wedding.
Yes.
And my father was in a little bit of a state before the wedding, and I had to get him to confirm 2 weeks before whether or not he was coming because we needed to finalize numbers. And eventually he said no, he couldn't make it. And I said, well, that's fine. It's really okay with me if you can't. that's on you. And I remember my sister, like asking me.
She was willing to like fly him up and put him in accommodation, do whatever.
Yeah,
it
she
took.
was willing to fly him up if that's what I wanted.
Yes.
And she says, I just want your day to be perfect. And I said, whether he's there or not doesn't actually make or break my day. I did it because that's the right thing to do, and I did the right thing. But it is not my responsibility to make up for his consequences or to change the consequences of his actions.
Yes.
And unfortunately, whatever that situation was a product of his own consequence. So it wasn't my loss. I gave him enough notice. I did everything that I could do on my part. And I think he was also quite upset because we were having a white wedding, but at no point had I asked him if he would walk me down the aisle and give me away. But again, that was not something that he was entitled to and not something that I feel he deserved, because the person who gives you away is a person who has stood by you, and that was my mother. So my mother and my 3 nephews, they gave me away.
Yes, because they were responsible for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is pretty much the story then of my father.
There's obviously still a lot more to talk about on this topic. We summarized our father's presence and non-presence in our lives, but then obviously those gaps get filled by people. For me, it was a combination of my grandfather, my stepfather, my mother, and, a lot of other elders that filled the job. And for you?
Definitely the same. I mean, between my mother and my sister and my uncles and just everybody who was actually a part of my life growing up played a specific role where I never felt that gap. And I think that's definitely something that we are going to discuss in part 2 of this topic, along with some of the stereotypes, how we view our mothers, how society has viewed our mothers being in the situation, and also the influence of step-parents when it comes to these kind of things. Yeah, so stay tuned for the rest of the story. Until that episode, Shup, sweet and aware. Lots of love.